Cassidy, and Ambie, and Crystal, the board game blitzers, showing your favorite games.
My number 20 is Codenames, which is a team word game. So I talked about Codenames Duet previously, which is based on Codenames. Codenames is a team game where there's a card grid of 25 different words, and there's 2 teams. Each team has one clue giver who knows which words are their teams and which words are the other teams, and the rest of the people on the team are trying to guess the clues. So the clue givers have to give clues by giving one word and one number, and the word has to try to match up all the words, or a certain number of words that are that team's words, so they try to guess it. So for example, if they're trying to get them to guess dog and cat, they can say pet 2 or animal 2 or something to say that there's 2 cards that are related to that clue. But it's hard to try to think of clues that relate to your words but not to the other team's words. And there's also an assassin card that if you pick that, then you immediately lose the game. So you're trying to look at all the words but relate only the words that you want to relate. So it's really fun trying to think of words, and as the guessers trying to guess, like, why did they pick that clue instead of something else. So I really like playing Codenames, and that's my number 20. My number 19 is 1860 Railways on the Isle of Wight, which is another 18xx game. 1860 has a lot of things that are different about it and more complicated than 1830. The routes are a lot more complicated. There's big cities and small cities, and the trains are, usually trains are just one number for the number of cities it can reach, but here they have a number plus a smaller number and they can reach more cities. So there's a lot of route building in it, and you're trying to build up a really good company, because at the end of the game, there's this thing called nationalization, where all the track building stops, and then each turn, a couple of companies just die and get nationalized. And those are the worst companies. So the companies that have the worst routes at that time just go away, and then the other companies keep going and keep getting better, and then the next 2 go away. So it keeps doing that until there's only 2 left. So you really want to be invested in that company that has the best route at that time, because then you'll get a lot of money for that. Another interesting thing is that the companies come out 2 at a time. You can't get all of them. And as time goes on, you have to par them at a lower price, which means you can put less money into the newer companies, which is interesting. So I like 1860 because of the nationalization at the end of the game. A lot of times I get kind of bored at the end of the game if people are just upgrading a little bit and then just, it's a lot of repetitive parts. But here it stops all the upgrading and just the end game is happening. So I like that part. It's also known as one of the 18xx games that is good at 2 players, which I haven't played it at 2 players in a long time, so I'm not actually sure if that's true, but I do want to try it again at 2 players. But I usually like it at 3 players. So 1860 is one of my favorite 18xx games, and that's my number 19. My number 18 is Le Havre, which is a game where you have one worker that you're moving around to different buildings to do different actions, and you're trying to get the most money. The game takes place in a port city, and there are different buildings that are cards. And throughout the game, you can build new buildings when you get a bunch of resources, and you can build the buildings. And when you have a building in front of you, you can go to it for free, or other people can go to it and pay you a certain amount of food or money to go on the building, depending on what building it is. Another thing is you can build ships, and the ships get better and better as time goes on, and those give you food because you have to feed your people. But there's a lot of things you can do, like you can get fish, and then there's a smoke house where you can smoke the fish into smoked fish and they get better. Or you can get cows, and there's a building where you can turn the cows into meat. And there's a bunch of things where you get like raw materials, and then there's buildings that you can turn them into more refined materials. So as the game goes on, it keeps building up and up, and you're getting more and more things. And the actions that you did earlier that were really good then aren't as good anymore, because you can get a lot more with one action. So I really like that build up, and I think it's a lot of fun. I've only played Le Havre at 3 players. I've heard it's too long at 4 players, because even at 3 players, the game takes a few hours. but it's really fun and I really like building up my port city. My number 17 is Crossfire, which is a party game with hidden identities. The game just comes with a bunch of cards, and each card is a different role that you deal out to the different players. And each card has a different win condition. For example, one person is a VIP and their win condition is to stay alive. Another people are the assassins and their win condition is to kill the VIP. But no one knows who anyone is, except at the beginning you look at your card, then you pass it to the person on your left, I think, and then some cards get mixed up, and you see another card, and then some more cards get mixed up, and then you get your final card. So you have some information about the cards that are next to you, but you don't know who has what. The game itself is really quick. There's a timer for, I think, 3 minutes, where you're just talking to each other, trying to figure out who is what and what you want to do, and then at the end, everyone points at someone, and that's the person they're shooting. But only certain characters can actually shoot people, and then that gets resolved, and then you see, depending on who died, who's still alive, and what happened, you see who won. But I think it's really fun. It's really quick, and I really like hidden identity games where you're pretending to be someone else. And this one's good because you have some information at the start, so you have something to go on, which is really fun. And that's why Crossfire is my number 17. My number 16 is Pret-a-Porter, which is a game where you're a fashion designer trying to get the most money by making different fashions and showing them off at fashion shows. So this is another worker placement game where there are a bunch of spaces on the board that have different actions you can do, and you put your pawns on the board there to do the actions. So there are different actions like you can hire people or get buildings, and you can get new designs, and you get fabric, and you need the fabric in order to create your design and show it off at the fashion show. So in order to get your fashion show ready, there's a lot of planning and steps that you need to take to get a good set of fashions for the show. There's 4 different fashion shows throughout the game, and each time there are different things that are graded on that are worth different amounts of points, like the quality or the number of things that you showed at the fashion show. And then you get a lot of points for doing that, and you can also sell your fashions to get money. I like how the theme of Pret-a-Porter is really unique, and it works pretty well with the game because you're planning and you need all of the materials to build to make the fashion dresses and clothes that you're showing off. And I really like games where you plan ahead and you're trying to go for a specific thing and get the best thing. So I have a lot of fun playing Pret-a-Porter. My number 15 is Arkwright, which is a heavy economic game. So in Arkwright, you're building different factories that make different goods, and each round a different good is sold to the general public. What's cool about Arkwright is that there's this big group of workers, and in order to staff your factory, you take the workers, but it takes away from the workers on the board, and that makes the demand for goods go up because the workers have jobs now. So there's a mechanism where you take the workers away from the board. It also increases their wages, so you have to pay them more, but then it also increases the demand for goods that you're selling to them. So there's a lot of balancing with, you get to decide how many goods you want to produce in order to meet the demand, because you don't want to produce too much or it'll go wasted, and you want to be able to sell what you're making. But you're also competing with the other players, because if they're making the same thing and the supply is too much for the demand, then you won't be able to sell all of your things. Another thing you can do is ship the goods you make. So you can get contracts for certain goods and then get ships, and you have to fulfill the orders in order to get a lot of money. So I really like all the different things you can do in Arkwright and the interaction there is with the supply and the demand, because there's 4 different types of goods, and you get to choose what you're making, and you get to set the prices. So setting the prices based on what other people are doing and what they're making and what the demand is a lot of fun. So that's why Arkwright is my number 15. My number 14 is Kanban Automotive Revolution, which is a game where you're a manager in a car factory trying to get the most productivity points, being really efficient with what you're doing, like making cars. This is one of the few games where I know and like a character in the game, because there's a game-controlled character called Sandra, who is your boss, and she moves around the board and grades you on things, basically. But the way it works is you are one pawn, and there are different sections of the board that are the different areas of the car factory. Like there's one where you test cars, there's one where you get designs, there's ones where you get car parts. So you go to a place on the board, and there's also a certain number of shifts out of 4 shifts in the day, and you go to that space and it tells you how many shifts you can spend there. And that's how many actions you can do, or some actions take multiple shifts. There are a lot of things you need to do to get a car. You need to get the designs, you need to get the parts, you can get the car, you test drive the car, and you can upgrade cars. And then after you do all of that, then you end up getting upgraded car parts and car designs in your garage, and that's how you end up getting points. But the cool thing about the Sandra character is she goes to each space in order and grades people there, and people who don't have enough stuff there or aren't doing well are going to get docked points. And it's actually just the people who are doing the worst overall. So you just want to make sure you're doing better than your peers so that your boss doesn't dock you, which I think is really funny and kind of thematic in a car factory setting, I guess. So I really like the theme of Kanban, and I think it works well with the mechanisms. The mechanisms are pretty complicated and it's really hard to learn, but after you think about it with a theme, it's a little easier to remember. And I really like the character Sandra. So that's why Kanban is my number 14. My number 13 is Deception, Murder in Hong Kong, which is a game where there's one player who's giving clues about a murder, and everyone else is trying to figure it out, but one player is the murderer. So the way it works is that everyone has 2 sets of cards. One could be murder weapons, and one are clues left at the scene. And the murderer picks one of each at the beginning, and the person who's giving the clues gets to see it, but everyone else doesn't know. So the person who's giving the clues has different cards that have words on them, like they have a card that says location, and it has different locations. And they put markers on there to indicate what the clue is, but they can't speak. So for example, if the murder weapon were a poisonous apple or something, maybe a clue could be that the location was at a restaurant or some area with food, so that people would think, oh, maybe it's something to do with food. And so people are looking around and trying to accuse different people. But the murderer is also one of the people trying to accuse different people and cast suspicion off of them. So I think it's really fun, because even if the people know who the murderer is, they don't know which cards they chose, and they have to pick exactly right in order to win. So it can be pretty tough, but it's also a lot of fun. I've played Deception, Murder in Hong Kong with my family and other friends and coworkers, and everyone has enjoyed it. So that's why it's my number 13. My number 12 is The Ravens of Three Sahasri, which is a 2-player card game that's cooperative, but also asymmetrical. So you're working together, but each player has very different roles. The game's a card game, and there's a bunch of cards that are different colors and different numbers from 1 through 5. One player plays Ren, a girl who's stuck in a dream, and she starts with 4 cards that are hidden, and they have certain colors on them. And at the end of the game, it needs to have only those colors in the middle of the table. But she doesn't place those cards in the middle of the table. The other player, Feth, does, and that's her friend trying to help her. So the Feth player draws cards from the deck one at a time and then puts them in the middle following certain rules. And then the Ren player, on her turn, takes one of the cards and puts it in her area. And she's trying to add up the cards to 7, 7, 7, and 5. So without communicating other than by playing and taking cards, the Feth player has to figure out what colors need to go in the middle, and the Ren player needs to somehow communicate that to him just by the cards that she's taking. It's very puzzly, and the art is really pretty too. There's big cards with nice art. And then after you win, there are 3 different envelopes that you open one at a time, and after you win each one, it gets harder and adds more rules. So we've only gotten to the first envelope, but I really enjoy playing it, and it's fun because also you get to switch off characters, and they play very differently. So even if you win with one person as one character, you switch it off and then it's a very different game. So I really like the Ravens of 3 Sahasree. My number 11 is 1857, which is another 18xx game. This one is very similar to 1830. It uses the same tiles and similar rules. But in 1857, there is one fewer of each train, which means that the train rush will happen very quickly. So if you watched my earlier video, the train rush is because when you buy new trains, old ones go away, and then you have to keep buying new ones. So when that happens, there's a spiral of buying trains, and whoever can't buy a train might go bankrupt. And this happens a lot in 1857, where someone goes bankrupt, and that ends the game. But it's very fast for an 18xx game, and we also use it as an intro game because of that. It lasts about 2 hours usually in our games. And I really like the train rush because it's very exciting when that happens, and people are just scrambling to try to get a train that they can hold on to. And there's also cool things in the map too. The game takes place in Argentina, and then Chile is an off-map location that's worth a lot. And so I like trying to get there with a couple of companies. And also, all of the tokens of companies start on the map at the beginning, so you can't really go through locations that you otherwise would have been able to go through. So the map is interesting, and the train rush is really fun. And that's why 1857 is my number 11.